In a small university town nestled between rolling hills and bustling streets, life moved at its own pace. The air was often filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting from cozy cafes, where students huddled over textbooks, professors scribbled notes on napkins, and locals chatted about their day. Among these familiar faces was Dr. Adrian Caldwell, a man whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. Known for his sharp mind, quick wit, and unshakable confidence, Adrian was one of the most respected mathematics professors at the university. He had spent decades immersed in numbers, equations, and theories, earning accolades and admiration from colleagues and students alike. Adrian wasn't just intelligent, he carried himself with an air of authority that made people sit up straighter when he entered a room. His lectures were legendary, not only because they challenged even the brightest minds, but also because he had a knack for making complex concepts seem almost poetic. Yet despite his achievements, Adrian harbored a quiet arrogance. He believed that true intellectual brilliance was rare, reserved for those who dedicated their lives to rigorous study and academic pursuits. This belief sometimes blinded him to the possibility that extraordinary talent could exist outside the walls of universities or research labs. On one particular afternoon, Adrian found himself seated at his usual spot in a quaint little cafe called the Steaming Page. It was a place he frequented often, drawn by the soothing hum of conversation and the rich scent of espresso. With a stack of papers spread across the table, he graded assignments while occasionally glancing around the room. That's when he noticed her, a woman sitting alone at a corner table near the window. She looked ordinary enough, dressed in simple clothes, with her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her hands moved steadily as she sketched intricate patterns onto napkins, pausing now and then to sip her tea. Adrian studied her curiously. There was something oddly captivating about the way she worked, her movements deliberate yet relaxed. At first glance, she didn't fit the mold of someone who belonged in this academic-heavy environment. No textbooks, no laptop, no signs of scholarly ambition, just a sketchpad, a pen, and a cup of chamomile tea. To Adrian, she seemed like someone who might work part-time jobs, perhaps waiting tables or shelving books at the library. Someone unremarkable, at least in terms of intellectual prowess. But curiosity got the better of him. Adrian couldn't resist testing his assumption. After all, he reasoned, what harm could come from posing a harmless question? Reaching into his bag, he pulled out a piece of paper and jotted down a challenging calculus problem. It wasn't just any problem. It involved multiple layers of integration, partial derivatives, and a tricky boundary condition designed to stump even advanced students. Satisfied with his creation, Adrian stood up, walked over to her table, and placed the paper gently beside her sketchpad. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but tinged with condescension. "I noticed you seemed deep in thought. Thought you might enjoy something to pass the time." He gestured toward the paper, offering a faint smile that barely concealed his smugness. For a moment, the woman looked surprised, her hand freezing, mid-sketch. Then slowly she turned her gaze to Adrian, studying him with calm, piercing eyes. There was no trace of offense or irritation in her expression, only quiet amusement. "Thank you," she replied softly, her voice steady and warm. Picking up the paper, she examined the problem briefly before nodding. "This looks interesting." Without another word, she tucked the paper into her bag and returned to her sketches, leaving Adrian standing there slightly taken aback. He hadn't expected such composure, or was it indifference? Shaking off the fleeting doubt, he returned to his seat, confident that he wouldn't hear from her again. Surely the problem would prove too difficult for someone like her. What Adrian didn't know was that the woman's name was Evelyn Harper, and she was anything but ordinary. Beneath her unassuming exterior lay a mind sharper than most. Growing up, Evelyn had displayed an uncanny aptitude for learning. By the age of 10, she was devouring high school math textbooks for fun. By 15, she was solving college-level problems with ease. Numbers came naturally to her, almost like a second language. But unlike many prodigies who pursued prestigious careers, Evelyn chose a different path. She valued simplicity and creativity, finding joy in exploring ideas without the pressure of recognition or competition. Art became her outlet, allowing her to express herself freely while keeping her mathematical talents hidden from the world. As the days passed, Adrian forgot about the incident at the cafe, or so he told himself. Truthfully, it lingered in the back of his mind, nagging at him like an unsolved equation. So when Evelyn reappeared at the same cafe exactly 2 days later, Adrian felt a flicker of anticipation. She approached his table this time, holding a neatly folded sheet of paper in her hand. Without saying a word, she slid it across the table and sat down opposite him. Curious, Adrian unfolded the paper and began reading. At first, his brow furrowed in confusion, then widened in astonishment. Not only had Evelyn solved the problem correctly, but she had done so with remarkable efficiency. More impressively, she had included alternative methods and elegant shortcuts that streamlined the solution process. Adrian stared at the page, his heart racing. How could someone solve such a complex problem with such clarity and precision? Looking up, he met Evelyn's calm gaze. "How did you?" he started, his voice trailing off. Evelyn smiled faintly, her expression unreadable. "It's just math," she said simply, "and I like math." That single sentence struck Adrian like a thunderbolt. Here was someone who saw mathematics not as a daunting challenge or a means to an end, but as something beautiful and enjoyable. Someone who solved problems not for accolades or validation, but because it brought her genuine pleasure. In that moment, Adrian realized he had underestimated Evelyn, and perhaps in doing so, he had underestimated the very nature of intelligence itself. Evelyn's solution to the calculus problem lingered in Adrian's mind long after their brief encounter at the cafe. He couldn't shake off the feeling of awe mixed with disbelief. How could someone who seemed so unassuming possess such profound mathematical ability? It gnawed at him, not just because he had underestimated her, but because her approach to the problem was unlike anything he had seen before. She hadn't merely solved it, she had elevated it, transforming a complex equation into something almost poetic. Her alternative methods were elegant, efficient, and innovative, qualities that even seasoned mathematicians struggled to achieve. Adrian found himself replaying their interaction over and over in his head. Evelyn's calm demeanor, her quiet confidence, and her modest response when he asked how she had done it. All of it puzzled him. Who was she? What drove her to solve problems with such ease, yet remain so detached from the academic world where such talent would be celebrated? The more he thought about it, the more curious he became. And curiosity for Adrian was a powerful force. It wasn't enough for him to marvel at her abilities. He needed to understand them. He needed to know if this was a fluke, or if Evelyn truly possessed the kind of genius that defied conventional expectations. The next day, Adrian returned to the cafe, half hoping and half dreading that Evelyn might be there. To his relief and slight apprehension, she was seated in the same corner table sketching once again. This time, her focus seemed entirely on her art. Intricate patterns danced across the page, blending symmetry with chaos in a way that was strangely mesmerizing. Adrian hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her, but his curiosity won out. Clearing his throat softly, he walked over to her table. "Good afternoon," he began, his tone polite but tinged with nervous energy. "I wanted to thank you for solving that problem I gave you. Your solution, well, it was remarkable." Evelyn looked up, her expression calm and composed. "You're welcome," she replied simply, setting down her pen. It was an interesting challenge. Adrian pulled out a chair and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "But I have to ask," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "how did you do it? Where did you learn mathematics like that?" Evelyn studied him for a moment, as if gauging his sincerity. Then, with a small shrug, she said, "I've always been good with numbers, it's just something that comes naturally to me." Her answer was disarmingly simple, but Adrian sensed there was more to the story. Pressing further, he asked, "Did you study mathematics formally? Were you ever involved in academia?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, not really. I read a lot when I was younger, mostly out of curiosity. but I never pursued it professionally. Life took me in a different direction. Adrian frowned, struggling to reconcile what he knew about Evelyn with the image of a self-taught genius. But your methods, they're advanced. Some of the techniques you used are things I teach in graduate-level courses. How did you learn them? Evelyn smiled faintly, her gaze softening. Books, mostly, and practice. When you spend enough time thinking about something, you start to see patterns others might miss. Math is like art in a way. There's beauty in finding new ways to express the same idea. Her words struck a chord with Adrian. He had always believed that mathematics was a rigid, structured discipline, governed by rules and logic. Yet Evelyn spoke of it as though it were fluid, creative, and open to interpretation. It was a perspective he had never considered, and it intrigued him deeply. Over the next hour, they talked, not just about mathematics, but about life, creativity, and the intersections between disciplines. Evelyn shared fragments of her past, revealing that she had grown up in a small town where resources were limited, but her hunger for knowledge was insatiable. She described how she would visit the local library every week, devouring books on everything from physics to philosophy. Mathematics, however, was her first love. There's something comforting about numbers, she explained. They're constant, reliable. No matter what happens in life, 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. Yet despite her passion, Evelyn chose not to pursue a traditional academic path. Instead, she embraced a simpler life, working as a freelance artist and exploring her interests freely. I didn't want to be boxed in by titles or expectations, she admitted. Sometimes the pressure to perform can stifle creativity. I wanted to keep learning for the joy of it, not because I had to prove anything to anyone. Adrian listened intently, captivated by her insights. He realized that Evelyn's brilliance wasn't just a product of raw intellect. It was rooted in her unique perspective, her willingness to see connections others overlooked, and her refusal to conform to societal norms. For all his accomplishments, Adrian recognized that he lacked her humility and openness. His own journey had been driven by ambition, recognition, and the need to excel within established frameworks. Evelyn, on the other hand, operated outside those boundaries, carving her own path with grace and authenticity. As their conversation drew to a close, Adrian felt a mix of admiration and unease. Evelyn had challenged not only his assumptions about intelligence but also his understanding of what it meant to be truly exceptional. She embodied a kind of genius that transcended accolades and degrees, a quiet, unassuming brilliance that spoke volumes without seeking attention. Before leaving, Adrian extended an invitation. "Would you consider attending one of my lectures?" he asked. "I think my students would benefit from hearing your perspective. Plus, I'd love to see how you engage with more advanced material." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, amused by the suggestion. "Are you sure your students would appreciate having someone like me in the room?" she teased. "I might end up stealing their thunder." Adrian chuckled, though there was a hint of seriousness in his tone. "I doubt they'd mind. In fact, I think they'd find it inspiring, and honestly, so would I." Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right," she said finally. "I'll come, but don't expect me to take notes. I already know most of what you'll be teaching." Her confidence caught Adrian off guard, but he couldn't help smiling. "We'll see about that," he replied, rising from his seat. As he walked away, he glanced back at Evelyn, who had already returned to her sketches. For the first time in years, Adrian felt a spark of genuine excitement, not just about mathematics, but about the possibility of learning from someone who saw the world through a completely different lens. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. Evelyn's presence in his life would soon challenge everything he thought he knew about teaching, intelligence, and the nature of true genius. And though Adrian couldn't foresee the impact she would have, one thing was certain. His world was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Evelyn's arrival at Adrian's advanced calculus lecture caused quite a stir among the students. The classroom buzzed with whispers as she walked in, her quiet confidence setting her apart from the usual attendees. Clad in simple clothes and carrying nothing more than a notebook and pen, Evelyn slipped into a seat near the back, seemingly unfazed by the attention she was drawing. To the students, she looked like an outsider, an artist, or perhaps a curious visitor, but none of them could have guessed the depth of her mathematical prowess. Adrian stood at the front of the room, watching her settle in with a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. He had deliberately invited Evelyn to observe the class, but now that she was here, he felt a strange sense of unease. What if she pointed out flaws in his teaching methods? What if her insights overshadowed his own? Despite these fleeting doubts, Adrian couldn't deny the excitement bubbling within him. For years, he had thrived on intellectual challenges, but this was different. Evelyn wasn't just another brilliant mind. She represented something entirely new, a fresh perspective that could push him beyond his comfort zone. As the lecture began, Adrian launched into a detailed explanation of partial differential equations, a topic known for its complexity. He wrote equations on the board with practiced precision, breaking down each step for the benefit of his graduate students. Most of them scribbled furiously, trying to keep up with his rapid pace. But Evelyn sat calmly, her pen moving only occasionally, to jot down notes. Her focus was unwavering, her eyes scanning the board with an intensity that made Adrian glance over his shoulder more than once. When it came time for questions, Adrian opened the floor, expecting the usual queries about specific steps or clarifications on terminology. Instead, one hand shot up immediately. Evelyn's. "Yes?" Adrian asked, gesturing toward her. His voice betrayed a hint of nervousness, though he tried to mask it with professionalism. "You mentioned earlier that this equation assumes symmetry along all axes," Evelyn said, her tone calm but firm. "But what happens if we introduce asymmetry? Wouldn't that change the boundary conditions significantly?" The room fell silent. Adrian blinked, momentarily caught off guard. It was a valid question, one that required deeper analysis, but not something he had prepared for. In this particular lecture, after a pause, he nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent point," he admitted. "Introducing asymmetry does complicate things, but it's certainly worth exploring further." He proceeded to explain how such modifications would affect the solution, improvising as he went along. Throughout the discussion, Evelyn listened intently, occasionally nodding or offering subtle suggestions that expanded upon his explanations. The students watched in awe as their professor engaged in a lively dialogue with this unexpected guest. They had never seen Adrian so animated, or so challenged. Typically, his lectures were authoritative and polished, leaving little room for deviation. But today, Evelyn's presence seemed to unlock a side of him they hadn't witnessed before. Curious, adaptable, and eager to explore uncharted territory. After the lecture ended, several students approached Evelyn to thank her for her contributions. "You really made Dr. Caldwell think," one of them remarked with admiration. Another chimed in, "I've never seen anyone ask questions like that. You must be some kind of genius." Evelyn laughed softly, brushing off the compliment. "I just like asking what if," she replied. "Sometimes the answers lead to interesting places." Meanwhile, Adrian lingered near the podium, gathering his notes while stealing glances at Evelyn. When she finally approached him, he greeted her with a wry smile. "Well, you certainly kept me on my toes today," he said, his tone laced with both amusement and respect. Evelyn tilted her head, her expression playful. "I hope I didn't make things too difficult for you." "On the contrary," Adrian replied. "Your questions added a layer of depth I hadn't anticipated. In fact, I think my students benefited from hearing perspectives outside the standard curriculum." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "Maybe there's value in looking at problems differently," she suggested. "Sometimes the best solutions come from stepping outside the usual framework." Her words resonated deeply with Adrian. Over the years, he had prided himself on being a master of structured thinking, adhering strictly to proven methodologies. Yet Evelyn's approach reminded him that innovation often stemmed from embracing uncertainty and exploring unconventional paths. It was a lesson he realized he needed, not just as a teacher, but as a thinker. Determined to test Evelyn's limits further, Adrian decided to issue another challenge. This time, however, it wouldn't be a single problem, but a series of increasingly complex ones designed to stretch even the sharpest minds. He handed her a folder containing 3 pages of equations, each more intricate than the last. "Consider this your next assignment?" he said with a mischievous glint in his eye. "If you can solve these, I'll admit defeat." Evelyn accepted the folder without hesitation, her expression unreadable. "Challenge accepted," she said simply. Then, with a small wave, she turned and left the classroom, leaving Adrian to wonder whether he had underestimated her once again. Over the following weeks, their rivalry intensified. Every Friday, Adrian presented Evelyn with a new set of problems, ranging from theoretical puzzles to real-world applications. Each week, she returned with flawless solutions, often accompanied by insightful annotations that expanded upon the original questions. Sometimes she included alternative approaches that simplified the problems, showcasing her ability to see patterns others missed. Adrian marveled at her creativity, realizing that her genius lay not just in solving equations but in reimagining them entirely. Their interactions became a delicate dance of wit and intellect. Adrian pushed Evelyn to delve deeper into abstract concepts, while she encouraged him to embrace flexibility and intuition. Though their dynamic remained competitive, it evolved into something more collaborative, a mutual exchange of ideas that fueled their shared passion for mathematics. One evening, after reviewing Evelyn's latest solution, Adrian found himself reflecting on their journey thus far. She had challenged him in ways no one else ever had, forcing him to confront his own biases and assumptions. And yet, despite their differences, they shared a profound connection, a love for discovery, and a desire to uncover truths hidden beneath layers of complexity. As he closed the folder containing her work, Adrian smiled to himself. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: Evelyn Harper had changed his life forever, and deep down, he knew their story was far from over. The weeks turned into months, and Adrian found himself increasingly drawn to Evelyn's quiet brilliance. Each problem she solved not only showcased her mathematical prowess, but also revealed glimpses of her personality, her humility, creativity, and ability to find beauty in complexity. Yet despite their growing camaraderie, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much about her he didn't understand. Who was this woman who could effortlessly unravel equations most people would struggle to comprehend? What drove her to live such a simple life while harboring extraordinary talents? One evening, after another stimulating exchange during one of his lectures, Adrian decided it was time to dig deeper. As the students filed out of the classroom, he approached Evelyn, who was gathering her notebook and pen. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. Evelyn looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Sure," she said with a faint smile. They walked together to a nearby bench outside the university building where the golden hues of sunset bathed the campus in warmth. For a while, neither spoke. The gentle rustle of leaves and distant chatter of students filled the silence. Finally, Adrian broke it. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, "about how little I actually know about you. You solve problems like no one I've ever met, yet you seem completely uninterested in recognition or accolades. Why is that?" Evelyn glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. She didn't answer immediately, as if weighing whether to share something personal. Then, with a soft sigh, she began speaking. "When I was younger, I used to dream of becoming a mathematician, or maybe a physicist. I loved the idea of contributing to humanity's understanding of the universe. But when I entered college, I quickly realized that academia wasn't what I imagined." Adrian listened intently, sensing the weight behind her words. "What do you mean?" he prompted gently. "It felt suffocating," Evelyn admitted. "There was so much pressure to publish papers, compete for grants, and prove yourself constantly. It wasn't about discovery anymore. It was about validation. People weren't solving problems because they were curious. They were doing it to climb the ladder, to earn titles and prestige. And honestly, I didn't want any part of that." Her confession struck a chord with Adrian. He had spent his entire career striving for excellence within the very system Evelyn described, earning accolades and respect along the way. But hearing her perspective made him question whether he had lost sight of why he fell in love with mathematics in the first place. Instead, Evelyn continued, I chose a different path. I wanted to keep learning, not for recognition, but because it brought me joy. Math became my sanctuary, a place where I could explore ideas freely without worrying about expectations. Art gave me a similar freedom, a way to express myself without judgment. Together, they allowed me to create something meaningful on my own terms. As she spoke, Adrian saw a side of Evelyn he hadn't noticed before, a vulnerability beneath her calm exterior. She wasn't rejecting intellectual pursuits outright. She simply refused to let them define her. Her decision to step away from academia wasn't born out of apathy or laziness, as he might have assumed initially, but rather out of a desire to protect her passion from being diluted by ambition. I guess what I'm trying to say, Evelyn concluded, is that intelligence isn't just about solving equations or writing papers. It's about how you use your gifts, and whether you stay true to yourself in the process. Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with Adrian. For all his achievements, he realized he had spent years chasing external validation, measuring his worth by awards and accolades. Evelyn, on the other hand, had embraced a quieter, more authentic form of success, one rooted in curiosity, creativity, and self-awareness. In many ways, she embodied qualities he admired but had long forgotten. Determined to bridge the gap between them, Adrian leaned forward, his eyes earnest. Evelyn, I need to ask you something. Would you consider collaborating with me on a project? Something that combines math and art, the two things you clearly excel at? Evelyn raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. What kind of project? I'm not entirely sure yet, Adrian admitted. But imagine taking abstract mathematical concepts, like fractals, chaos theory, or even higher dimensional geometry, and turning them into visual representations. We could create pieces that not only educate but inspire people to see math in a new light. For a moment, Evelyn didn't respond. The idea was bold and ambitious, blending disciplines in a way few had attempted before. It would require time, effort, and trust, qualities she hadn't always associated with academic collaborations. Yet there was something undeniably appealing about working with Adrian now that she understood his motivations better. His initial arrogance had given way to genuine curiosity and respect, qualities she appreciated deeply. Finally, she smiled. You're serious about this, aren't you? Absolutely, Adrian replied, his enthusiasm evident. Think about it. We could make something truly groundbreaking. Plus, I think it'd be fun. Evelyn chuckled softly. Fun, huh? That's not a word I hear often in academic circles. Well, maybe it's time we change that, Adrian countered with a grin. After some deliberation, Evelyn agreed to give the collaboration a try. Over the next several weeks, they dove headfirst into the project, spending countless hours brainstorming, experimenting, and refining their ideas. Adrian brought his expertise in theoretical mathematics, while Evelyn contributed her artistic vision and intuitive grasp of patterns. Together, they explored ways to translate complex equations into stunning visuals, using colors, shapes, and textures to convey meaning. Their partnership proved to be both challenging and rewarding. There were moments of frustration when their differing approaches clashed, but these disagreements often led to breakthroughs. Adrian learned to embrace ambiguity and spontaneity, while Evelyn discovered the value of structure and precision. Slowly but surely, their combined efforts began to take shape, resulting in breathtaking works that blurred the line between science and art. One evening, as they stood back to admire their latest creation, a swirling depiction of a Mandelbrot, set rendered in vibrant hues, Adrian turned to Evelyn with a satisfied smile. We did it, he said. This is incredible. Evelyn nodded, her eyes reflecting pride and wonder. It really is. I never thought math could look so alive. Their collaboration didn't stop there. As word of their work spread, invitations poured in from universities, galleries, and conferences around the world. They gave talks, hosted workshops, and exhibited their creations, inspiring countless young minds to view mathematics through a creative lens. Through it all, Adrian and Evelyn remained partners, not just professionally but personally. Their friendship deepened, built on mutual respect and a shared mission to challenge conventional boundaries. Looking back, Adrian realized that Evelyn had taught him far more than he had ever anticipated. She had shown him that true genius wasn't confined to classrooms or laboratories. It thrived wherever curiosity and authenticity intersected. And though their journey had started with a simple calculus problem, it had blossomed into something far greater, a testament to the power of collaboration, humility, and the enduring beauty of discovery. The collaboration between Adrian and Evelyn quickly gained momentum, transforming from a modest experiment into a full-fledged movement that captured the imagination of people across disciplines. Their work was unlike anything the academic or artistic worlds had seen before, a seamless fusion of mathematics and art that challenged traditional boundaries. What began as an exploration of abstract concepts like fractals, chaos theory, and higher dimensional geometry evolved into a body of work that spoke to both the heart and the mind. Their first major exhibition, titled Patterns of Infinity, took place in a renowned gallery in the city center. The space was transformed into a labyrinth of light, color, and form, with each piece inviting viewers to step into the intricate beauty of mathematical ideas. One installation featured a towering sculpture of interlocking spirals inspired by Fibonacci sequences, its golden proportions casting mesmerizing shadows on the walls. Another showcased a digital animation of a four-dimensional hypercube rotating gracefully, its impossible geometry rendered tangible through Evelyn's artistic touch. Every corner of the gallery buzzed with excitement as visitors marveled at how something so cerebral could feel so alive. Adrian and Evelyn stood together near the entrance on opening night, watching as crowds moved through the exhibit. Students, professors, artists, and curious locals mingled, their faces lighting up with wonder. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing excitedly at colorful diagrams that explained complex theories in simple terms. Even seasoned mathematicians found themselves pausing to appreciate the elegance of equations they had studied for years, but never seen visualized quite like this. "It's surreal," Adrian murmured, his voice tinged with awe. He gestured toward a group of teenagers huddled around one of the interactive displays, debating the implications of chaos theory. "I've spent my entire career teaching math, but I've never seen it spark this kind of enthusiasm." Evelyn smiled, her gaze softening as she observed the scene. "People are drawn to things they can connect with emotionally," she said. "When you show them the beauty behind the numbers, they stop seeing math as intimidating or irrelevant. It becomes human." Her words resonated deeply with Adrian. For years, he had approached teaching as a means of imparting knowledge, focusing on rigor and precision above all else. But Evelyn's influence had shifted his perspective. Together, they had created something that didn't just educate, it inspired. And inspiration, he realized, was far more powerful than any lecture or textbook. As word of their success spread, invitations flooded in from universities, museums, and conferences around the globe. Adrian and Evelyn traveled extensively, sharing their work with diverse audiences and learning from others along the way. In Tokyo, they collaborated with architects to design a public park based on geometric principles, turning urban spaces into living works of art. In Paris, they led workshops for aspiring artists and scientists, encouraging them to find common ground through experimentation. Each experience deepened their understanding of their own project and reinforced their belief in the power of interdisciplinary thinking. But perhaps the most profound impact came not from the grand exhibitions or international acclaim, but from the quieter moments, the conversations sparked by their work. At a small community center in rural England, a shy teenager approached Evelyn after a talk, clutching a notebook filled with sketches and calculations. "I love math, but everyone says there's no future in it unless you're amazing," the girl confessed. Your work makes me think maybe I don't have to choose between my passions. Maybe I can combine them. Evelyn knelt down to meet the girl's eyes, her expression warm and encouraging. You absolutely can, she said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The world needs people who see connections where others see barriers. Watching the exchange, Adrian felt a surge of pride, not just in Evelyn, but in what they had built together. Their partnership wasn't just about creating art or solving problems. It was about empowering others to embrace their unique talents and perspectives. They were planting seeds of curiosity and creativity, nurturing a new generation of thinkers unafraid to challenge conventions. Back home, Adrian began incorporating elements of their collaborative approach into his teaching methods. Gone were the days of rigid lectures and dry problem sets. Instead, he encouraged his students to explore math through storytelling, visualization, and hands-on projects. He invited Evelyn to co-teach several classes, allowing her to share her insights and inspire budding minds. The results were remarkable. Students who had once struggled with abstract concepts suddenly found clarity and joy in applying them creatively. Some even began pursuing careers at the intersection of math and art, citing Adrian and Evelyn as their inspiration. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to balance her dual pursuits, finding harmony between her roles as an artist and a mathematician. Her freelance work flourished, thanks in part to the exposure brought by their collaborations. Galleries clamored to showcase her pieces, and commissions poured in from clients eager to bring a touch of mathematical elegance into their homes. Yet despite her growing fame, Evelyn remained grounded, staying true to the values that had guided her throughout her life: simplicity, authenticity, and a relentless curiosity. One evening, as they sat together in Adrian's cozy study, surrounded by stacks of books and half-finished sketches, Evelyn turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder if we're making too much noise?" she asked. "If we're drawing too much attention to ourselves?" Adrian chuckled, setting aside the journal he'd been scribbling in. "Is that really such a bad thing? After all, isn't the whole point of what we're doing to get people talking? To make them question old assumptions and imagine new possibilities?" "I suppose," Evelyn conceded, though her tone hinted at lingering hesitation. "It's just, I've always preferred working quietly, without fanfare. Now it feels like the spotlight is everywhere." "You earned it," Adrian replied firmly. "And besides, think of all the good your voice does. People listen to you because you speak from a place of truth. That's rare and incredibly valuable." Evelyn considered his words, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's okay to step into the light as long as we stay focused on why we started this journey in the first place." Their shared mission became clearer with each passing day, to demonstrate that intelligence wasn't confined to classrooms or laboratories, nor was it defined solely by accolades or titles. True brilliance lay in the ability to bridge gaps, foster understanding, and celebrate the interconnectedness of seemingly disparate fields. Through their work, Adrian and Evelyn showed the world that math and art weren't opposites. They were two sides of the same coin, united by patterns, symmetry, and the endless pursuit of meaning. By the time they embarked on their largest project yet, an immersive museum exhibit combining virtual reality, soundscapes, and tactile installations, Adrian and Evelyn had become household names. Critics hailed them as pioneers, while fans hailed them as visionaries. Yet beneath the accolades and admiration, their bond remained rooted in mutual respect and a shared sense of purpose. They challenged each other daily, pushing boundaries and exploring uncharted territory, but they also supported each other through doubts and setbacks. Looking back on their journey, Adrian couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. What had begun as a chance encounter in a cafe had blossomed into a transformative partnership that redefined not only their lives, but also the lives of countless others. Evelyn, for her part, often reflected on how Adrian's persistence and eventual humility had opened doors she hadn't known existed. Together, they proved that genius wasn't about standing apart. It was about bringing people together, inspiring them to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. And though their story was far from over, one thing was certain. Adrian and Evelyn had created something timeless, a legacy of balance, beauty, and boundless possibility that would continue to resonate for generations to come. Years later, as Adrian sat in his modest study surrounded by books and sketches, he reflected on the remarkable journey that had transformed not only his life, but also the lives of countless others. The walls of the room were adorned with framed prints of their collaborative works, fractals rendered in vibrant colors, geometric sculptures captured mid-rotation, and intricate diagrams that seemed to pulse with energy. Each piece told a story of discovery, creativity, and partnership, a testament to what could be achieved when two minds dared to challenge convention. Adrian's career had taken an unexpected turn after meeting Evelyn. Once known for his rigorous lectures and impenetrable academic papers, he now embraced a more inclusive approach to teaching and research. His classes became incubators of innovation, where students were encouraged to experiment, question, and create without fear of failure. Many of them went on to pursue careers at the intersection of disciplines, inspired by the example set by Adrian and Evelyn. Some even founded programs aimed at fostering interdisciplinary collaboration, programs that mirrored the very philosophy Adrian and Evelyn had championed. For Evelyn, the years brought both recognition and fulfillment. Though she never sought fame, her unique blend of mathematical insight and artistic vision made her a celebrated figure in multiple fields. Her work appeared in galleries, scientific journals, and educational curricula worldwide. Yet despite her growing reputation, Evelyn remained steadfastly humble. She continued to live simply, dividing her time between freelance projects, teaching workshops, and mentoring young creators who shared her passion for blending art and science. To those who looked up to her, Evelyn was more than an artist or mathematician. She was a beacon of authenticity, proof that it was possible to achieve greatness while staying true to oneself. Their collaboration left an indelible mark on academia and beyond. Together, Adrian and Evelyn co-authored several books that explored the connections between math and art, breaking down complex concepts into accessible language accompanied by stunning visuals. These publications became bestsellers, reaching audiences far beyond traditional academic circles. Teachers used them in classrooms to inspire students, artists referenced them to inform their work, and curious individuals turned to them as gateways into worlds they had once thought inaccessible. But perhaps their most enduring contribution was the establishment of the Nexus Initiative, a foundation dedicated to nurturing unconventional thinkers. Named for the intersection of disciplines that defined their partnership, the initiative provided grants, resources, and mentorship to individuals pursuing innovative projects at the boundaries of art, science, technology, and beyond. Through this program, Adrian and Evelyn hoped to create a space where people could explore ideas freely, unburdened by societal expectations or rigid structures. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the university campus, Adrian and Evelyn found themselves walking together along familiar paths. It had been years since their initial meeting at the cafe, yet the memory still felt vivid, as if it had happened just yesterday. They strolled past the same benches where they had debated theories, the same lecture halls where Evelyn had challenged Adrian's assumptions, and the same courtyards where students now gathered to discuss their own dreams and aspirations. "It's strange," Evelyn said, breaking the comfortable silence. "When we started all this, I never imagined it would grow into something so big." Adrian chuckled softly, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "Neither did I. But then again, I didn't imagine I'd meet someone like you either." Evelyn smiled, her gaze drifting toward the distant skyline. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if we hadn't crossed paths?" "All the time," Adrian admitted. "I like to think I would have eventually figured out that intelligence isn't confined to degrees or titles, but it probably would have taken me a lot longer, and I doubt I would have done half the things we've accomplished together." They paused near a fountain at the heart of the campus, its gentle spray catching the last rays of sunlight. For a moment, neither spoke, content to simply savor the quiet beauty of the scene. Then Evelyn turned to Adrian, her expression thoughtful. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? About how math is constant and reliable?" Adrian nodded, recalling the conversation clearly. "Yes, why do you ask?" "I've come to realize that people are like math in a way," Evelyn mused. "We're all made up of patterns, habits, beliefs, experiences that shape who we are. Sometimes those patterns can feel limiting, like equations with no solutions, but every now and then, someone comes along who sees things differently, who introduces a new variable or flips the equation upside down, and suddenly, everything changes." Adrian smiled, touched by her analogy. "You're saying I introduced a new variable into your life?" "Something like that," Evelyn replied with a playful grin. "Though I think it worked both ways. You taught me to embrace structure and precision, while I reminded you to leave room for spontaneity and wonder. Together, we balanced each other out." As they resumed their walk, Adrian couldn't help but agree. Their partnership had been built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared commitment to pushing boundaries. They had challenged each other, supported each other, and grown in ways neither could have anticipated. In doing so, they had created something greater than the sum of its parts, a legacy of balance, beauty, and boundless possibility. Eventually, they reached the edge of the campus, where a plaque commemorating the Nexus Initiative stood proudly. Engraved on its surface were the words, "Innovation thrives at the intersections." Beneath it was a quote attributed to Evelyn. "True genius lies not in solving problems alone, but in seeing connections where none seem to exist." Adrian glanced at Evelyn, his eyes soft with admiration. "You know, I used to think brilliance was about being the smartest person in the room. Now I realize it's about making everyone else in the room smarter, and braver, and kinder, and more curious." Evelyn laughed softly, shaking her head. "Leave it to you to make it sound poetic." "Well, I learned from the best," Adrian replied, gesturing toward her. They shared a smile, the kind that comes from years of friendship and understanding. As the evening deepened and the stars began to emerge, Adrian and Evelyn lingered for a while longer, watching the world move around them. Though their individual journeys would continue to evolve, they knew they had already achieved something extraordinary. Together they had redefined what it meant to be intelligent, creative, and human, to see the infinite possibilities hidden within the ordinary, and so their story became legend, not just within the university but far beyond. It served as a reminder that brilliance isn't confined to institutions or accolades, that true genius transcends expectations, thriving in the spaces where curiosity meets courage, and that sometimes the most profound discoveries happen not in isolation but in partnership with someone who challenges you to see the world in a way you never thought possible.